Alright, let's talk about Silksong lore. I have a lot of thoughts that haven't exactly coalesced into an airtight theory, but there's a lot of stuff here that I haven't seen mentioned anywhere else that I think is fairly interesting, and I also have a common theory that is cool if not completely backed up by evidence. First off, there's a fairly common theory that the inhabitants of Farloom are being controlled by the Silk, which would make sense given the highlighted lines above enemies when they're killed because puppeteering, but it would also explain this bit of dialogue from the Forge Daughter, an NPC who doesn't attack you like the rest of the people of Farloom, who they describe as being all wound up, i.e. wound up in the silk that's being used to control them, which doesn't wrap around the Forge Daughter. Next, an interesting point to note about Farloom's folly is that it was written by the conductor Romano. The elegy for Hallownest was written by one of the Pale King's most trusted servants, Monomon the Teacher. It's no stretch to imagine that the conductor Romano serves this same role for the power that controls, or controlled, Farloom. This is also where my theory started. Conductors, despite what physics teachers will have you believe, are actually people who ensure that an entire orchestra plays music in harmony. Having that as a title in Silksong seems to suggest that some sort of musical coordination will be present throughout the kingdom of Farloom. I think from this, it's not much of a stretch to speculate then that whatever is haunting the citizens of Hallownest is a song that's being played on a loom which doubles up as a harp, and we even see a harp design in the reveal trailer at one of the towns that seems to be close to the top of the citadel. To extend on this theory, I think that the reason people go up to the top of the citadel is because going there is how you get rid of the puppetry that controls you, but getting there is perilous and almost always gets you killed. To speculate on this even more, my theory is that the only way to get up there and survive is by being called upon by the bell, which we see, I think, encased in a silk cocoon throughout the kingdom's imagery, and since everyone wants to be free and word of mouth is notorious for twisting messages as they're delivered, everyone has a bell and wants as many as possible to maximize their chances of being free. It could also be that they think that the bell is some sort of legendary item that will come in the future, so they're making as many as possible so that it comes as quickly as possible, hence all the discarded bells. It's also possible that this bell is only rung when the conductor, aka the leader, agrees to ring it, and Conductor Romano is a previous conductor who foresaw what happens in Silksong, which would presumably be Hornet ring Farloom, which is how they write Farloom's folly. Anyhow, as I said earlier, I think the bell I'm talking about here is the bell we see at the top of the citadel, and it's legendary because it is the only thing which can free the inhabitants of Farloom. This is why it's depicted everywhere as the icon of a circle and hook surrounding it. Although we see this in other places as perhaps a ball of yarn or something, the cultists have staffs in this shape with bells in the center, which is what led me to believe, as I mentioned earlier, that perhaps the bell has been covered with yarn or silk to dampen its effect, thus explaining both things. The bell is also heavily played up as the way to salvation, hence the reason people come to Farloom as a pilgrimage, and the reason people have basically started borderline worshipping the bell, because if it calls you, then you're free. Indulge me for a second while I go on a bit of a weird tangent. Could it be that the reason this bell hasn't been rung is that whenever the bell rings, a new person is called up to the top of Farloom to become the conductor, to control the inhabitants using the huge loom harp thing, and that there's a cycle that's meant to continue, but they're using all of this extra unnaturally produced silk from imprisoned weavers to dampen the bell so that Farloom remains in stasis forever. This would explain why the weaver's home is now hostile towards them. They can easily produce enough to keep the kingdom in harmony to keep the instrument working, but are now being forced to overproduce to keep it in stasis. It would also explain why the bell at the end of the IGN footage has a seal of binding. They don't want it to be wrong, they want to stay in power forever. However, neither of my theories explain the mark of fealty all workers text in the Deep Rock sub-area. If they're being controlled by silk, why do you need proof of their loyalty? Do bells in general have some sort of power I haven't speculated on here that lets them break the control if made in a particular way, and that's why the mark of fealty is needed? To ensure that they're not doing anything malicious and are still loyal despite having the power to free themselves? The thing I've been calling a bell could also be a master loop of yarn or lace that is used to control everyone, and they worship that master loop so diligently because it controls them. This would also explain the constant imagery of it as one of the most important things in the kingdom and why everyone has something that looks like it, but it wouldn't really explain the bells. Tangentially related to this though, in what has been speculated to be a bagger dungeon, there seems to be some sort of cast-off outcasts lair, which is dark and dingy to signify them being outcasts, and these people are probably cast out from society for using scissors to snip the silk that controls them themselves. We also see two characters in this lair holding staffs, perhaps indicating this might be magic of some sort, because I doubt normal blades alone could cut the silk that controls people. Okay, here's a question for you. If, like we thought, the cultists were capturing Hornet to force her to produce silk like the weavers, why would they bring her needle? If they wanted to keep Hornet subdued, why give her a weapon? Why even give her that chance? Something to think about. Another interesting thing I thought of, that is, again, pure speculation, is the Moss Mother like a sort of diminished Un? She bleeds the same color as the moss and the moss enemies do, and she might be something in between a higher being and a regular bug similar to Hornet. The reason I think this is so important important is because we see these cocoons in the moss grotto which have a spider web of silk around them. Can the moss people produce small amounts of silk? We know silk is dumb powerful in Silksong, so the ability to produce multiple organisms who can then produce silk and also be powerful enough to warrant a boss fight, I think that's enough to assume that the moss flower might have a power level a tad higher than just your regular boss. This is stupidly buried in speculation though, so take it with a truckload of salt. Also, something I haven't seen a lot of people talk about is that in the demo when Hornet kills this enemy, its shell comes off, and when you pause on these frames, it kind of looks like a spider, which given the whole weaver thing is pretty interesting to say the least. The flowers in the room with lace, are they delicate flowers? And if, and this is a big if, they are delicate flowers, could we say that whatever is at the top of the citadel is scared of beings trying to kill it, like the Shade Lord or the Knight, and has flowers growing there as protection? Hornet wouldn't be affected by them, as she's not void, but this power may have heard of the Pale King's antics from the trapped weavers and grown scared of the vessels that could somehow contain the Radiance, and since they're made of void, this kind of arena would be basically an insta-kill for them. It's also worth noting that Zamir, the Knight who gives us the delicate flowers in Hollow Knight, bears a strong resemblance to a harp or a loom with the lines up and down the body, as well as the weird shape. From this, it's my theory that perhaps Lace and Zamir are sisters, or something similar. Perhaps when trained fully, like how the Hollow Knight was trained to prime form and became bigger, so does the cocoon-like Lace become the more butterfly-like Zamir, who we know is good enough at combat to literally be one of the 5 knights. This theory does have some counterpoints though. First off, how are you walking and fighting on literal delicate flowers which break if they're jostled by a stag? Also, how did Zamir come to Hallownest, and why wouldn't she live with weavers? Why doesn't Zamir stay with the Deep Nest inhabitants, like the weavers, who weren't exactly buddy-buddy with the Pale King, and instead become one of his 5 great knights? All of this to say, I could be talking out of my ass for this entire video, as a reminder. The decoration in the lace fight is extremely reminiscent of God Home decor. Is it possible that this is a nod to the ending where the void is consumed by the pale flower somehow? No real theory here, just a thought. Another thought that isn't exactly a lore thought, but which bodes well for Silksong, the usage of the cocoons implies that Team Cherry has understood the flaws of the shade mechanic and is trying to counteract the effect it had, which was making people not want to explore that same area out of frustration, plus an increasing difficulty in a room they already struggled with enough to die in. Instead of the negative reinforcement of losing all your money if you don't go back to the cocoon, there's positive reinforcement. You get Silk to help tackle the room better and no money loss. I only know game design from binging every Game Maker's Toolkit video, but that seems like good game design to me. And that's it. Hope you enjoyed the video.